Wife cheats with longtime best friend and gets pregnant. I was married for 10 years the first time. I got married young, and was very happy to do so. About a year in, my wife, Jo, dropped any facade she had, and went full-blown into the eating disorder she'd been nursing her whole life. Knowing what I know now, there were huge signs of it that I didn't see. She spent 9 years yo-yoing her weight. She'd get up to 130 pounds, then down to 90 pounds, up to 150 pounds, down 80 pounds. This went on for 6 years of our marriage before, at year 6, she began to be hospitalized every other month to be stabilized so she wouldn't die. She finally got to a point where around year 8, she was so sick from malnutrition and down to 75 pounds that she was hospitalized again, and we were finally able to get her into a rehab for eating disorders. She spent several months there. On top of all of that, I was working full-time, and we were both going to school full-time. Throughout all this I was a doting and supportive husband. We were married after all, and that was through sickness and health, until death do us part. Apparently, that was only a one-way street. I did not cope well with this. We had always gotten drunk together, smoked pot, and took pills. All of that was done recreationally. However, round year 7, I hurt my back and got some painkillers, and I began taking them every day. They became my way to cope. While she was in her rehab, I was coping with pills to help me sleep from the loneliness, stress, and pain of it all. When she returned, she wasn't the same person. She would sleep from 9 p.m. until 1 p.m., wake up for the afternoon and evening, then go back to bed at 9 every day. She was severely depressed, and the stress was getting to me, from the time she got home in September of year 8 until May of year 9. This was her schedule. In May, the stress of work, school, and this hell of a life finally destroyed me. I broke, and told her I had a problem, and I went to rehab. I had to start doing my own therapy, and going to my own doctor's appointments. I am happy to say I have been clean since then, although I still drank for almost a year after I got clean from pills. The thing is, I had neglected myself for 9 years while tending to her, and she didn't like it at all that I had to start focusing on myself at least a little bit. She began to get angry for me having to go to counseling, or the doctor, or any meeting I attended. Eventually, we decided that we needed to move to get away from both of our major triggers, my dealers and her mom. A year after she got out of rehab in September, we moved to my hometown. When we got there, we were having issues but were still working towards our mutual goals. We both got jobs easily enough, and she tried to say I didn't need to find any help with my issues because we were away from my triggers, but she still needed to get help. It became a fight. Then December happened. The beginning. It started small. First she told me that her manager at work kept complimenting her on how pretty she was. He told her he liked that she didn't have to wear makeup, and that she was naturally pretty, unlike his wife who had to cake it on like a clown. This went on for a few weeks. Then, one night she was getting off work and getting ready to walk to the gym when he saw her as he was leaving and offered her a ride. In the middle of it, I get a text from my mom asking why Jo was crying. I had no idea, and asked how she knew that. My mom's friend worked with Jo, and saw her run into the bathroom crying. I had an idea of why, but wasn't sure, but I told Jay what was going on, and what I thought. We commiserated until we got home. When we got there, we went to pick up Jo from the gym where she'd gone after work. Exercise bulimia. She exercised 2 hours every day, usually running 12 miles a day, and my fear was confirmed. She'd been let go from her job. It was sad, but we moved on. Jay and his daughter had been staying with another friend of ours as Jo and I lived with my parents at the time. We saw them when we could, and enjoyed getting to know his daughter. We enjoyed Christmas with Jay's host's family, and moved into New Year's. New Year's Eve. The night before New Year's Eve, one of my other friends had a party, but the party was a bring your whole family, put the kids to bed, and have adult time party. Some of us got really, really drunk. This includes Jo, Jay, and I. During the party, things were really weird. I thought I kept hearing Jo make weird comments, but was pretty drunk. I didn't trust my perception on this. At one point, I had to go to the bathroom. It felt like something was holding the door closed. I pushed on it, it gave, but as I tried to walk in, Jo comes out from behind the door and tries to get me to go somewhere with her. I told her I had to pee, went in and shut the door. That's when I see Jay behind the door. I drunkenly say, "Hi Jay, what's up?" as I go to pee, and he just says, "You really need to talk to your wife," and walks out of the bathroom. When I was done, I asked her what that was all about, and she said she was asking him for advice on our marriage. It irked me, but I was too drunk to care or think logically about it. All three of us went to sleep in the living room of Party House that night after the party. The next morning, I woke up pretty early, and I was hungover badly. I woke up Jo and told her I needed to go home to sleep in a real bed, asked if she was coming. She said she just wanted to sleep, and was staying. Still not thinking right, I said okay and walked the few blocks to my parents' house. I went back to sleep immediately. I was woken up a few hours later by Joe, Jay, and his daughter coming into the room and jumping on me. For the next few hours, we sat in my room watching movies and TV shows and just generally having a good time. I did catch a few weird things happening between the two of them though. At one point, I thought I saw Jay put his hand high up on the inside of her thigh out of the corner of my eye, but when I looked he had moved it off her completely. I didn't know if I was imagining it or not. I was getting suspicious of them, especially after finally thinking about the bathroom incident, but nothing concrete. Then my mom asked me to go to the store for her. I asked if they wanted to go, but they both said no. My niece on the other hand said yes, so I thought, hey, some uncle/niece bonding time, and took her with me. Plus I also thought I'd see if I could catch them in the act. The girl and I went to Walmart and got what my mom wanted, and I bought the girl a gift. We went back to the house and we went inside. When we pulled up, I could see them in the window moving really quickly, but by the time I could look, nothing was amiss. I sat there stewing for a couple hours and I hatched my plan. Somehow, I can't remember exactly. I think I said I forgot/wanted something. I let them know I needed to leave again and telling them I'd be back, since it was later in the evening by this point. His daughter was asleep, so I didn't need to take her, nor would I have if she wasn't. Where we lived, my bedroom window looked out onto the driveway, so they'd always know when I came back. I'd never be able to catch them doing anything if they could see every time I came home. I had to sneak up on them. When I left, I drove a small bit away like I was leaving, but instead pulled over a couple of blocks away and walked back. I went back to the house, and because you could hear the front fence from my room whether the window was shut or not, I went to the back gate and went into the yard. I walked to the front and stood in the shadows outside my bedroom window, seeing if I could see anything. Oh, I definitely did. They looked like they were wrestling, and although they were fully clothed, you could tell it wasn't just playing. I watched for a few seconds to make sure I really didn't misunderstand the situation. But he put his hands up her thighs and onto her crotch and then kissed her deeply. They were doing this on the floor as to not disturb the kid on the bed sleeping. I was pissed. I walked into the house and to my bedroom. I opened my door. To their shocked surprise, they pushed off each other and tried to say they were just playing around and fell off the bed. When I said I saw everything from the window including the kiss, I stepped over them both, grabbed the money from our little safe, resisted the urge to kick them in their grave faces as they wouldn't shut up about how sorry they were, said a few choice words, and walked out. They tried to come after me, but because I had parked to come in the back gate, and they didn't know that, they went out the front to look for me. That night, I got a hotel room. Joe kept blowing up my phone, and I finally answered and told her to quit calling. I wasn't coming home. They apparently stayed at my parents' house, which after finding out what happened my parents were not happy with. While I lapped in luxury at my hotel, crying my eyes out and raging to myself. New Year's Eve. The next day, I texted the host of the party, LL, to let her know what happened. She commiserated with me and said Jay was supposed to be coming over later and we'd talk later. Joe called me again and told me that she was sorry for the umpteenth time. I was having none of it. Sometime in here she told me that she had gotten a ride from her boss the night he fired her, and he had kissed her again, and that she had liked the adrenaline rush. She said she liked it, and went looking for it again, but now didn't like the outcome. I told her to leave me alone for a while and we'd talk. Later that night, I went to LL's house to talk, but on the way there, Joe and Jay saw me as they were walking to the gym. Can't let your marriage falling apart stop you from gym time, people, and tried to get me to stop. I rolled down my window and told them to leave me alone, but they kept standing in front of the truck to get me to stop. When I would, they'd walk to get me to roll down the window and I'd try to go again. Rinse and repeat. I rolled down my window again and told them to let me go. I wasn't in the mood to talk and I was getting madder than I already was. Jay just stood in front of my truck, so I got out. I yelled at him for a minute before he went to give me a hug and apologize. I snapped. I shot in for a double leg and somewhere in the melee of our scramble, I ended up on his back, I sunk in a sleeper hold, and pushed his face into the snow. Joe was screaming for me to stop while I'm trying to choke the life out of this guy who used to be my brother before she finally started trying to pull me off him. I told them to leave me alone, let go, got back in the truck and left. I went to LL's house and told her what happened. That was the last time I saw Jay before he left. Aftermath. On New Year's Day, I talked to Joe. I couldn't stay in the hotel very long due to money, and she had nowhere to go but back home to her mom. Neither of us wanted to give up the marriage, or so we thought, but started to reconcile. In that reconciliation, she told me everything that happened. After I left to go home, LL and her husband went out for breakfast with their kid and asked Jay if they could take her daughter. He said yes, and that left Joe and Jay alone together. They had sex, but according to both of them, I talked to Jay a few months later, but that's part of another story. It wasn't much of a good time. He literally one pump chumped her. She said the sex wasn't the good part. It was the adrenaline she got from that new and exciting feeling. She said that after her boss kissed her the second time, she started craving that rush. They had sex on LL's couch. This was not long before Jay left, and I told LL what happened. She was pissed and hasn't talked to Jay since. Eventually Jay left, and we began to work on our marriage to see if we could fix the broken parts. She was still insistent I not get therapy. Too bad for her. I was already in. We hadn't had sex for a couple months before she cheated, and that never happened again. Less than 2 weeks after she cheated, she made plans to go back and see her mom. She left the day before my birthday despite me begging her to wait. She wouldn't. As we are driving to the airport, our drive to get there, she gets a text message that I look at. Before that text, we never hid our phones from each other. If I got a text, she'd read it and hand it to me. I'd do the same. I did so this time and she got angry. The contents were probably the reason. Turns out, she had reconnected with an old boyfriend from high school. That text message. Maybe I should bring my vibrators. When I rightfully asked WTF that was all about, it devolved into a fight about me looking at her text despite this never having been a problem before. We spend the last bit before we get to the airport fighting. When we get there, we angrily say goodbyes and I love yous and she leaves. She spent the whole trip cheating on me with said ex-boyfriend. She tried to keep it a secret by saying they were just hanging out, but when they are just hanging out and she won't text me for 4 hours, it's kind of telling. Why I let her come back, I'll never know, probably because of the phone call. Not long before her trip is supposed to end, almost a month later, she calls me crying. She has happy news, she says. She's pregnant. At the time, I hadn't put together that I couldn't possibly be the father, so I let her come home and we resolved to put everything behind us to raise the baby. We went to the first checkup and that's when I discovered there was no way I was the dad. Time-wise, it wasn't possible. I was not happy with this development and let him know he was going to be a dad again. He didn't believe me. It was a moot point anyway. Less than a month later, she lost the baby at about 10 weeks. That is when the marriage really went downhill. By the end of March we were done, and I was alone. She was back home with her mom, and I was drinking quite heavily. How we got there is another story entirely.